down the pile of money, and I will sprinkle kerosene on it and set it afire. Vote for me. I didn't get many takers, but that's what we do. The problem with countries like ours is we cling to yesterday's way of doing things in the face of tomorrow's realities. The problem with really poor places is the lack of capacity to build the structures we take for granted. And both those things have to be attacked, which means there's a room for NGO action in Canada as well as in Haiti, in America as well as in Latin America and Africa. But the people are there. And now, because of the interdependent world, we can know them as we have never done before. And it really depends upon whether we understand how we relate to other people on earth, to people who have gone before and people who are not yet born. And I'll just close with a couple of stories and ask if you can imagine these kids, these people at McGill. The biggest problem in AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis care, particularly in AIDS now, we're still working on the affordability of good malaria medicine. And the Gates Foundation gave us a ton of money this year. We're working in 11 African countries on that. But the biggest problem in AIDS medicine now, in AIDS care, is not the cost and availability of the medicine. Nobody's going to die this year because of that. But a lot of people are going to die because there are no health systems out there. And it's not like a food airlift. You can't just drop the medicine out in the middle of a field and have people come woof it up. So we spent a lot of time working on this. And I was in Rwanda a couple of years ago where there was only one major hospital after the genocide. And our project now, with a wonderful man named Paul Farmer who runs Partners in Health and has worked in Haiti for 20 years, we brought the model to Rwanda. We now built 9 hospitals in all the regions and clinics and then regional community workers. So I wanted to see the first point of contact. So one of these community workers who simply trained to take people medicine, check on, see whether they're doing it, bring it back to the testing facility, took me to this village that was really poor and really small and had one sort of little general store, you might say, if you could call it that. It's almost like just one little counter. And I went to the home of a 19-year-old girl and her 15-year-old brother. She had raised him, her brother, since she was 12 and he was 8. Both their parents had died of AIDS. She was free of the virus. He had it. It's a miracle that he was alive because for most of his childhood, he didn't have access to the medicine or any care. He was much stunted in his growth and was so sick for his childhood that he'd only done 3 years of school. And our people there with our foundation loved these kids so much that they actually built them a new house because they were living in a mud circle. About 6 times the square footage of this podium. It's unbelievable. They built them a nice house, 2 rooms, walk through, and you can cook outside in the back. So I said to the young woman, I said, do you have any dreams for your life? Do you have any plans? She said, well, you know, I spent my whole life being my brother's parent, sort of, taking care of him. And I'm so glad he's going to live. But she said, now that you mention it, I do. I want to own a store. Look around here. There's just nothing to buy in this town. I felt like I was in Arkansas somewhere, you know. So, and one of the people with me was so moved where he just blurted out, he said, I'll finance it. He said, you just tell me what you want. I'll set you up. But it was funny. But then I got down on my knees to look into the eyes of this very small 15-year-old boy. And I said, I know you've been sick a lot. I know you've only done 3 years of school. I want you to look at me and tell me you're not going to quit. And for the first time, he threw his head back and laughed. He said, quit? I'm going to stay until I become a doctor so I can help other kids like me who won't get as sick as I did. Now, I don't know if this kid's going to make it or not. But the point is, can you imagine? Would you have that kind of gumption if you had lived how he had lived? But he has his dreams. We forget that at our peril. When I was doing this work after the tsunami in Indonesia, one of the worst things I had to do is go into the camps in Indonesia where people were living long after the tsunami in these hot tents and tin roof houses in India. It's the hardest thing after any natural disaster to get the housing right again. It's just hard to do. So there were thousands of people living in this camp. And there were 40,000 total still in the camps after I said they'd be out of them. So I decided to go take a few lumps and tour one. And I had a wonderful interpreter who had been an Indonesian television person. This young woman quit so she could work in the camps. She's taking me around. So first thing is I get out of the car, and I'm met by the elected president of the camp association, representing all the people living in this camp, and his wife and his son. They were smiling, glad to see me, thank you, got to show you what the problems are. And then the woman and her son walked away, and the gentleman took me on the tour. But I said to my interpreter, I said, I believe that's the most beautiful child I ever saw in my life. I literally gasped when I looked at this little boy. He had these luminous eyes. He looked like he was going to just levitate in my presence. He was so beautiful. And my interpreter said, yes, he's very beautiful. And before the tsunami, he had 9 brothers and sisters. They're all gone. But here's this guy with a smile on his face, never mentioned it once, only talking about the current needs of the other people in the camp. So we take the tour. We end at the health clinic because they knew I had a special interest in that. And we went through all the things they were doing. And then all of a sudden, I see the camp president's wife shows up again with a newborn baby, 2 days old in her arms, smiling, happy. And she says, this is our youngest child, the most recently born. And she said, in our culture, the woman stays in bed for 40 days after she has a baby and then gets up and we name the child. I hesitate to mention that here. It could lead to a radical change in things in Canada. But she said, I just talked to the mother and the father, and they want you to name the child in honor of your visit. So I said to my interpreter, ask her if what the word in your language is for new beginning. Because there were lots of people, 250,000 people died in this tsunami. So she talks to the woman, they talk, and she turns around and she said, lucky for you. In our language, the word dawn, D-A-W-N, is a boy's name, not a girl's name. And the mother says to tell you, we will name this boy Dawn, and he will symbolize our new beginning. I'm looking at this woman smiling, holding this baby, realizing she's lost 9 of her 10 children, and she has the courage to go on and do this. And there are people like this all over the world. When I started working in Rwanda after the genocide, I met a woman who told me she awoke in a pool of blood after her village was attacked to see her husband and 6 children lying dead around her. And she screamed out in anger to God that she had been spared. And then she looked at me without blinking and she said, finally I realized I'd been spared for a reason. It couldn't be something as mean as vengeance. So I do what I can to help us begin again. She set up an orphanage and adoption placement services for children in both ethnic groups and placed them in homes without regard to the ethnicity of the parents as part of a national determination to let it go. My foundation buys baskets from a basket cooperative founded by a Tutsi woman and a Hutu woman together after the genocide The Tutsi woman had 10 children. 7 were murdered in the genocide. And she was a widow, too, so she had to begin again. The only reason her 3 oldest children survived is they were in the military. They were gone when the village was attacked. And her neighbors sold her out. Where their children had played, they shared meals, but people went crazy. And she knew to begin again with her skills, she had to have someone from the other ethnic group. They had to pull it together. So then they started training women, and more women came. Then they sold these baskets all over the world. Some of you probably have bought them. And so young men came for training. And about a year after they started taking young men, a 26-year-old man came to see her and said, broke down crying, said, "You have been so wonderful to me. I can't live with myself anymore. I murdered one of your children. And I know that your older sons are alive and in the military. If you want to send for one of them to come here and kill me, I will work until he comes. It is justice, and I owe you that." And this lady looked at him and said, "What good would that do? I forgive you. Get up and go back to work." Now, hard as it is to imagine, making the most of the applications of the human genome, a highly complex scientific endeavor, will require the mentality that you all displayed when you identified with that 15-year-old boy who's about the size of an 8-year-old. When you identified with those parents who lost their 9 kids and had 1 left, when you identified with these people. We simply have to understand that we are blessed to be alive. We should be proud of our own distinct differences, but our common humanity has got to drive every single important calculation of the 21st century. Because even the Nobel Prize winners, and I know McGill just produced 2 in science, are not nearly as smart as they think they are. Nobody is. Nobody is. So we are going to have to stumble into the future together. Thank you very much.